If asked about the most unique looking crocodilians that currently exist, most people would probably answer gharial. Well, at least people that are aware about the existence of gharial. Why? Because they have long and slender snout, equipped with uniform conical teeth, and they mostly eat fish. So yeah, you could argue they are indeed unique among the crocodilians. However, what you have been looking at, right from the start of this video up till now, is not a gharial. Those are all images of false gharial, aka Tomistoma, which is the topic of this video. False gharial had been debated in regards to where they belong in the crocodilian phylogenetic tree. Some of you might have heard about it, perhaps you haven't but could infer it to some extent, but maybe you don't want to guess and just want to be sure, and we will talk about it for sure. But of course, as always, let me bring up the fundamental question. What exactly is false gharial? So, I did say they are crocodilians, or at least I hinted so, which means they are reptiles in the order Crocodilia. By the way, keep in mind that some people would use crocodile for the whole member of this order, but I prefer to call it crocodilian to avoid misunderstanding. I've talked about it quite a while ago, so do check that out if you are interested. But anyway, the question, what exactly makes Tomistoma the odd one? Well, let's talk about the fundamental. Crocodilians are typically divided into three groups: alligators, crocodiles, and gharials. These three are different families, by the way, so actual taxonomy groups. Each are quite distinct from each other, so relatively easy to identify. Two traits that could easily be observed: the shape of their snout and the teeth. First, the shape of the snout. Alligators have U-shape, crocodiles have V-shape, while gharials have I-shape. Simple enough, right? Now, the teeth. Alligators have complete overbite because their maxilla, their upper jaw, is wider than their mandibula, their lower jaw. And so, when they close their mouth shut, most of their lower teeth are covered. Meanwhile, the teeth of both crocodiles and gharials are interlocking. The difference is, crocodiles' teeth vary in size. Their fourth mandibular teeth are especially prominent because they protrude and sit nicely on this notch. Meanwhile, like I said earlier, gharials' teeth are uniform. Oh, and also, they typically have more teeth, which would look like small thorns. And yeah, pretty easy tell, right? But now, the question is, where do the false gharial belong? Well, their snout is not U-shaped, and they don't have overbiting jaw, so definitely not alligator. That is obvious, but not so much between gharial and crocodile. When we first discovered them, we thought they belong with the gharials because they have long snout, and we assumed they like to eat fishes. But then, several decades later, we noticed that perhaps they are not gharials. You see, when you look at their snout, the base is quite broad, hence it would look like a V, more than an I at least. Besides that, when you look at their teeth, some of them are especially prominent, sitting on the notches here. And so, they should belong with the crocodiles, right? It is also especially clear when looking at their skull. Their skull is quite similar to crocodile skull, at least compared to gharial skull. And so, for decades, the consensus is that false gharials are not gharials. They are crocodiles, hence the name, false gharials. But then, in basically every single recent molecular analysis on them, the tree showed them clustering together with the gharials. The molecular analysis showed the opposite result from the result of morphological analysis, hence the confusion. When I got into a herpetology study club about 12 years ago, people are still grouping Tomistoma together with the crocodiles. But nowadays, I think more and more people started accepting the fact that Tomistoma are indeed gharials. And so, people started calling them Malayan gharial or Sunda Gharial. But false gharial is still the most commonly used name for them. And I believe IUCN still classify them in Crocodilidae family, not Gavialidae. So yeah, still debatable I suppose. Oh, by the way, there is only one extant species of Tomistoma, which is Tomistoma schlegelii. Tomistoma means cutting mouth or something along the line of sharp mouth. Meanwhile, schlegelii is given in honor of Hermann Schlegel. If it's not obvious enough, They are also called Malayan Gharial or Sunda Gharial because they can only be found in the Sunda land, this area right here. In the past, their distribution might extend towards the east of Java and perhaps also towards Thailand, but this is their current distribution. So, how unique are they actually? Well, let's talk about their morphology. But before that, while they are definitely not the largest crocodilians, they can be quite big. On average, adults can reach around 4 meters long, but some articles stated they can reach 5 meters long, maybe even 5.5. Though I wouldn't really take it too seriously because hyperbole is quite prevalent when talking about quote unquote ferocious creature. Oh, and I would also like to state that false gharials are typically smaller than the actual gharials. I'm stating this because people often think gharials are quite small because they are mainly piscivorous, but no, they are actually big. Anyway, the length of false gharial snout is around 3 to 3.5 times the width, which is quite long, but still proportionally shorter or at least stouter than the gharials, which could reach a length of 5.5 times the width. Oh, by the way, according to a relatively old article from the IUCN Crocodile Specialized Group, some of the longest skull specimens of crocodilians are from false gharial. And if you stumbled upon that information, I would like to emphasize the fact that those are based on specimens stored in museums around the world. The truth could be different, and maybe the data is even outdated. So yeah, false gharials have two rows of less obvious post-occipital scales. Behind that, they have three rows of continuous nuchal scute pair. Meanwhile, gharials have two prominent post-occipital scale, and behind that are four rows of continuous nuchal scute pair. And yeah, this, alongside the shape of the snout and how their teeth look, are some relatively easy to notice traits that you could use to differentiate the two. There are other traits like number of dorsal scale rows, ventral scale rows, supracaudal whorl, and color scales that can also be used to differentiate them, but those are not that practical when you are observing them in the wild, or perhaps in captivity, where you are most likely looking at them from above. Or where most of their body is submerged, hence you could only look at the top of their head. Besides that, although I wouldn't recommend using coloration for crocodilian identification, I just want to say that false gharial typically have vivid brownish coloration. At least so far, I haven't seen a false gharial that isn't noticeably brown. It also shows on their face, which also has some black blotches on the side by the way. Meanwhile, the real gharials typically have the typical dark olive or grayish color that many crocodilians have. But yeah, like I said, I wouldn't recommend using it as a way to identify them. But you could use it as a complementary trait just to be extra sure. Or you could simply think of it as a random trivia. Oh, and also, false gharials don't even have gara, which is where gharial names comes from. So yeah, they are false gharial in multiple ways, I suppose. Still, we've only been talking about the differences in morphology. How about their behavior? Well, let's talk about their ecology. False gharials typically live on peat swamp or flooded forests. Meanwhile, gharials typically live on big rivers, which is why false gharials are less aquatic than true gharials. Besides that, while true gharials are mainly piscivorous, false gharials are generalists. So, you could say false gharials are ecologically similar to many tropical crocodiles. They typically breed during the rainy season, which is around November to February, or around this time of the year actually, April to June. I know that might sound weird for those who live in, well, other parts of the world, but that's just how it is here. Courtship typically happen during nighttime. They would approach each other, rub their snout against each other, but besides physical acts, they also vocalize. 7 different acoustic signals were identified and noted in this research article. Unfortunately, it's not open access, so I couldn't exactly show that. That being said, while the specific frequencies of the calls are unique to them, their courtship behavior in general is quite common for crocodilians. My point is, if you just want to see how it is in general, There are tons of videos on crocodilian courtship, so start googling I suppose. But anyway, they will make a mound nest, and female typically lay around 20 eggs per nest, but can lay up to 41 eggs. I've read some articles stating they could lay up to 60 eggs, which to be fair is not outrageous for crocodilians, but I simply couldn't find the specific research article that reported a clutch size of 60. So take it with a grain of salt. After around 3 months of incubation, eggs will start hatching. Hatchlings will leave the nest and soon after move to the water body. In other crocodilians, mother will typically help the hatchlings in moving to the water body. Meanwhile, according to this publication, said behavior was not observed on false gharials, not on that occasion at least. Females reach sexual maturity at around 20 years age, which is really late for crocodilians by the way. False gharial is categorized as endangered by the IUCN Red List. While they are sometimes hunted by locals, habitat loss is the main cause of their population decline, which, unfortunately, is also the case for a lot of animals that live in this area. I know because, well, I live in this area. At least in Indonesia, a lot of the forests have been converted into oil palm plantation. And it's probably not stopping soon because the president even stated he wanted to increase the amount of oil palm plantation, which is quite the statement from a country that proudly presents itself as one of the mega biodiverse country. As a zoologist, being an Indonesian is truly a blessing but also a curse at the same time. But anyway, false gharial is still being monitored, so who knows what we'll learn in the future. For now, let's just learn what is known. And that's all for now. Oh, by the way, while Tomistoma is now limited to the Sunda land, fossil Tomistoma, or at least its close relatives, had been found in South Asia, even towards the Africa and Europe. Anyway, enjoy your day.